March the 31st, 1922, in a small Bavarian farmstead, a vicious crime took place where 6 victims were murdered by an unknown assailant. The 4 of the murdered victims were stacked up in the barn. It has been suggested that the victims were lured into the barn one by one, whereas the 2 other victims were murdered in their sleep. The case has been extensively investigated on and still remains unsolved to this day. Starting from the beginning, Hinterkaifeck is located near the woods outside the Bavarian town of Gruesome. It was home of 35-year-old Victoria Gabriel and her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph, as well as her elderly parents, Andreas and Cecilia Gruber. Strange things began to occur in and around Hinterkaifeck sometime shortly before the attack. As 6 months prior to the attack, the family maid heard horrible sounds in the attic, presumably mumbling of whispers and sounds of footsteps resonating against the floor. Believing that the house is haunted, she quit. Later, Andreas Gruber found a strange newspaper from Munich on the property. He could not remember buying it and initially believed that the postman had given him the wrong newspaper. Although later investigation shows that this was not the case, however, as no one in the vicinity subscribed to the paper. One morning, as Gruber ventures outside his home, he discovers footstep tracks in the fresh snow that led from the forest to his house, but none leading back into the woods. While finding his keys have gone missing, Gruber told neighbors and several people of these observations. One neighbor offered to lend Andreas a gun to defend his family with, although he refused any help offered and the details went unreported to the police. During that night, some of the family heard strange sounds of footsteps in the attic, although as Gruber searched in the attic and the building, he found nothing. Later, on the afternoon of March the 31st, a Friday, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the farm. Maria's sister had escorted her there and left the farm after a short stay. Maria's sister was most likely the last person to see the inhabitants alive. On that night on March the 31st, 1922, was the day that the Hinterkaifeck murders started. Before the night of the attack, some of the family was presumably resting and some asleep. It was suggested that strange sounds came from within the barn, which may have caused the family to investigate the barn. As each person was lured through the stable to the barn, one at a time, they were murdered. The killer, using a mattock, he killed the family with blows to the head and stacking their lifeless bodies in the corner of the barn. After this, the killer moved into the living quarters, where with the same murder weapon, he killed Joseph sleeping in his bassinet, and the maid Maria Baumgartner in her bedchamber. The discovery of the bodies took 4 days during this time. It was noted by the public that Cecilia Gabriel was absent without excuse for the next few days of school, and the family failed to show up for Sunday worship. Also, on April the 4th p.m., Lorenz Schlittenbauer sent his son Johann and stepson Joseph to Hinterkaifeck to see if they could make contact with the family. When they reported that they did not see anyone, Schlittenbauer headed to the farm. The same day, with Michael Poe and Jacob Sigel entering the barn, they discovered hidden in the corner under hay the bodies. Finding most of the family piled on top of each other, and shortly after they found the chambermaid Maria Baumgartner and the youngest family member, Victoria's son Joseph, murdered in their home. Investigations of the killings was taken immediately by Inspector George Reingruber and his department, although initial investigations were hampered by the number of people who had interacted with the crime scene, moved bodies and items around, and even cooked and eaten meals in the kitchen. The day after the discovery of the bodies, a court physician performed the autopsies in the barn and established that a mattock was the most likely murder weapon, though the weapon itself was not at the scene, but was found when the building was soon demolished a year later. It was concluded from the investigation that the killer had remained at the farm for several days, maintaining the farm by feeding the animals and milking the cows, as well as cooking and eating from the family food stock. Furthermore, strange clues were found in the attic. There were signs that more than one or possibly 2 have been sleeping in the hay. More of it was scattered on the ground to possibly deafen their footsteps. opinions are divided on whether this is the hiding place or a secret place used by the children. When trying to find the suspect, the police first suspected the motive to be robbery, and they interrogated travelling craftsmen, vagrants, and several inhabitants from the surrounding villages. When a large amount of money was found in the house, they abandoned this theory. With no clear motive to be gleaned from the crime scene, the police began to formulate a list of suspects. The favoured suspect over the years is Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He crossed paths with Victoria and admits to a relationship with her, but this seems to have stopped when she became pregnant with Joseph. Despite her insisting he was the father, Lorenz showed spite over her pregnancy, reporting her to the court and fabricating a lie that the pregnancy was the result of incest between her and her father, Andreas, and later retracting his accusation. Later, before Joseph was born, he offered to marry her, but she refused. This likely could show a lot of bad feelings between the two. Importantly, this backstory gives Lorenz a strong motive to commit the murders, although he was well known in the surrounding area and no one saw him around the crime scene. Between Friday and Tuesday, despite repeated arrests, no murderer has ever been found, and the files were closed in 1955. Nevertheless, the last interrogations took place in 1986. Throughout the murder case, there was a wide of multiple inconsistencies. Firstly, in the inspection record of the court commission, it was noted that the victims were probably drawn to the barn by restlessness in the stable from noises of the animals. A later attempt, however, revealed that at least human screams from the barn could not be heard in the living area. Secondly, on the night after the crime, 3 days before the bodies were discovered, Michael Flockel happened to pass by Hinterkaifeck. Flockel observed through the house window that the oven had been heated by someone inside. Flockel also noticed that the smoke from the chimney had a disgusting smell to it. This instance was not investigated, and there were no investigations conducted to determine what has been burned that night. Nevertheless, between 1919 and 1922, there has been a rash of similar crimes occurring within a 10-mile radius of Hinterkaifeck, all involving bludgeoning and sometimes theft. Today, Hinterkaifeck is an abandoned place. After the murder, no one wanted to live there anymore, and just under a year after the crime, the farm was sold and the buildings were demolished. Currently, the building was replaced with a shrine, where the victims, including the Grubers and their housekeeper, were laid to rest. Although, in 1999, an elderly woman contacted the police with a lead. She claims her former landlord admitted to having information about the killings. However, it was too late as the potential suspect was no longer alive. Moreover, in 2009, students at a German police academy used modern techniques to investigate the case. They ruled out all but one suspect, believing they committed the murders. However, as the suspected killer is dead, they did not publicly name the person out of respect for the suspect's relatives, who are still alive. Even to this day, the Hinterkaifeck murders is still considered one of the most gruesome and puzzling unsolved crimes in German history.